The following is a true story. In my early 20s, I worked in a call center for a well-known tech company. After I'd worked for my company for about 6 months, a group of new hires entered the floor, and a tall, skinny man sat down next to me and said hello. I returned his greeting and accepted an incoming call right after that. As I listened to my customer, I had a chance to take a look at my desk buddy. He smelled of stale cigarettes, and his hair was greasy, and his clothes were wrinkled and obviously too large. This was no surprise, as the call center often hired people who were down on their luck. But the next few weeks would prove to be some of the most unnerving I've ever experienced. His name was Ian. We happened to work the same shift, which began at 5 a.m. and included weekends. His energy was chaotic, and if no one was available for him to talk to, he typically would spend his breaks walking quickly around the 5-floor building. He also had a habit of appearing in whatever room I happened to be in during my own breaks. If a desk that was close to mine was open, he would use it. When I walked out into the entryway of the building, he would be waiting by the front door. When I exited the restroom, he would be leaning against the wall in the hallway. When I took my lunch breaks, he would always walk into the break room and make a beeline for my table. He even made it a point to leave his desk and follow me into elevators at every opportunity. If I was left alone with him, he would tell me long, meandering stories about his chaotic life and ask uncomfortable, prying questions about my life and schedule. All of this might not have been as creepy if the majority of it hadn't occurred before sunrise and in a building that was mostly unoccupied. And yes, I told my supervisor and team lead about this on several occasions with no results. One Friday morning, as I took my usual lunch break at around 9 a.m., I sat down at a table with 2 coworkers who had become friends. We had all been in the same pool of new hires. They were aware of the debacle involving Ian, and if they could, they would alert me when he was nearby. On this particular morning, my back was facing the hallway outside of the break room. And as I was speaking to one of my coworkers, Brittany, her face went from warm and smiling to attentive and tense as she looked over my shoulder. When this happened, I heard Ian say very loudly, "Oh, look, there's my cute little redhead." I shrunk into my seat. I instantly wanted to run and hide. Without acknowledging anyone else at the table, Ian pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down. My coworkers gave him weak smiles. I looked up and realized that his eyes were red and he appeared to be unsteady. I could smell hard liquor on his breath as he spoke. His clothes looked like he had been wearing them for the last 3 days. He leaned on the table, looked at me, and slurred, "Why haven't we gone out to dinner yet?" "Sorry, I don't date coworkers," I said. Ian looked at my coworkers. "Isn't she cute?" he shouted. "I like you, Anna." One of his arms flopped heavily onto one of my shoulders. Without thinking, I stood up and said to my coworkers, "I'll see you guys on the floor. I should get going." Ian looked insulted as I pushed in my chair and walked away. As I left the room, I heard him yell, "I love you," and I scurried to the next elevator. As the doors began to close, I heard a chair scrape across the tile floor, followed by quick footsteps headed in my direction. Ian shouted, "Why won't you talk to me? Come back." A couple minutes later, the elevator doors opened and I shakily returned to my desk. At 3 p.m., my shift finally ended. The company parking lot was huge, and on that particular day, I had to park unusually far from the front doors of the building. Remembering what my mom had told me as a teenager, I walked to my car with my keys individually squeezed between my fingers, ready to be used as weapons if necessary. In spite of the time of day, no one else was in the parking lot. My heart thumped against my chest as my head moved in a swivel while I walked. A familiar male voice shouted, "Hey," behind me. A cold shock jolted up my spine and I jumped, breaking into a jog. He yelled, "Hey," again. "Don't ignore me. Stop." I could hear footsteps approaching and keys jingling from one of his pockets. As I jogged, I gripped my car fob in my hand, and from a few feet away, I double-clicked the fob, unlocking the doors. I flung the door open, leaped inside, and locked the doors behind me just as Ian approached with a furious look on his face. I looked out the window as I stuck my key into the ignition and I started the engine. I threw the car into reverse, backed out before he could block me in, threw the car back into drive, and took off. In the rearview mirror, I could see him angrily throw his hands up in the air, and in that moment, I decided to call in sick the next day and then alert HR regarding my experience. Human Resources didn't seem overly concerned when I called them. No resolution was given. When I returned to work 2 days later, Ian wasn't there. He was also absent on days 3, 4, and 5. On day 6, after my shift ended, I turned on the local news. Ian Elias, age 47, shot and killed his ex-wife. After that, he took his 2 young daughters and went across town. He then had a standoff with the police before taking his own life. His daughters were unharmed, thank goodness. As I stood in front of my TV, I felt my mouth fall open. I could barely believe my eyes. I felt faint as I recalled my last interaction with him, wondering what would have happened if he had caught up with me in his mental state at that time. Ladies, trust your instincts. If you feel uncomfortable at work, please tell Human Resources. Although I was completely unharmed, I wish I had done so sooner. Clearly, Ian has some serious mental health issues, but a part of me still feels like this was a close call. And to see this man on the news later on was nothing short of surreal. At the time this happened, around the mid-70s, I was about 7 years old. Dad worked at the Chrysler plant on Shadeland Avenue in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the evening shift. I was an only child at the time, and it was just Mom and I at home. I remember it was that blue period of twilight right before the sky turned completely black. My mother was tucking me into bed, and she walked out of the room, shutting off the light but leaving my door open. My little twin canopy bed with pink and white gingham check patterns was right beside my window. As I was getting my stuffed animals and myself situated, I looked out the window to see what appeared to be a see-through craft of some kind drop slowly down from the sky. It was spinning really fast, and I remember thinking that I didn't see any blades and I couldn't understand how it could fly. As an adult, I realized that they were plane propellers or helicopter rotors, but I didn't see any on this craft. Knowing how fast it was spinning, my best guess as an adult was that it was running on centrifugal force. It blinked in alternate colors of red, blue, and green. It looked like it was made of acrylic or something similar. It slowly dropped down vertically and spun, blinking red, blue, green over and over again. It sat there for a while, just spinning and blinking. In my little girl's mind, it looked like a Christmas light. It was shaped like an acorn or a spinning top without the push handle. It went from dropping down vertically to sitting stationary and spinning to moving at a 90-degree angle. It again sat stationary and blinked. After a short time, it went back to where it originally dropped down. I was in awe. Even as a child, I was a level-headed, pragmatic little girl. I didn't have flights of fancy or tell big stories because I learned from a very early age that was very disingenuous. So I sat transfixed, watching this thing blink alternately, red, blue, green, and I tried to figure out what the heck it could possibly be. As I was studying it, I can't tell you how I knew, but I knew it was aware of me as well. As soon as that realization hit me, the craft took off like a bullet, vertically the same way it dropped down, but much faster this time. I was in shock, and the only concurrent thought I had was, we don't have anything like that. I didn't mean we as in Americans, I meant we as in Earthlings. Even as a child, I knew what I saw was something that I shouldn't have seen, and that it wasn't normal. As children can have selective hearing, parents can as well. I called to my mother several times, but she either didn't hear me or had the aforementioned selective hearing. I went to jump out of my bed, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm just a little kid. No one will believe me. They'll just think I'm telling the story. It most certainly did happen. Now, I want to point a few things out. If you're thinking that I just nodded off to sleep really quickly and had a very realistic dream, you are incorrect. I had just gotten to bed and hadn't even laid my head down yet. There was no way I could have been asleep. I've tried over the years to make sense of what I saw as a little girl. Now, one day, about a decade ago, I was watching Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I watched the air traffic controller scene that was based off of a real-life incident that happened at the Indianapolis International Airport. It rolled over me like a tsunami. I bet what the two pilots and the air traffic controllers saw that evening was the exact thing that I saw when I was a little girl. The time, the place, and the situation all lined up synergistically, and I've included the air traffic controller scene here. When I was about 11 and my brother was 6, my mother's aunt went into cardiac arrest 3 times and she was on a ventilator. We decided that if she went into cardiac arrest again, we would let her go. We had been at the hospital since about 9 in the morning, and we were told they would bring sandwiches to the room for my family to eat. They didn't, so around 4, we decided to go down to the cafeteria to get something, and my grandmother stayed with my aunt. They had what looked like day-old beans under a heat lamp, so yeah, no thanks. As we were leaving the hospital to go across the street to get some food, my brother tells my mom, "We have 30 minutes. We kept asking what it meant, but he would just shrug and giggle. Anyways, we ordered our food and we were talking and laughing when my grandfather gets a call. My mom's aunt was crashing. By the time we got back to the hospital, it had been 30 minutes. We still don't know how my little brother knew, and this wasn't the first time. While we were all crying and mourning her death, he said calmly, "It's okay, she's in the stars now." I grew up in a town that was known for its drug addicts, robbers, dangerous criminals, the whole shebang. I knew this from a young age, but it never really clicked until this. This is not necessarily the scariest story I could tell, but it definitely still haunts me to this day. Growing up, I had 4 sisters, and we all shared a room. And because of this, the layout was kind of strange. Basically, I didn't have a headboard, and my bed was centered on a window. So one night, I was around 7 or 8 years old at the time, and I was sleeping soundly, dreaming in a way only children know how. It was summer, and I had left my window about half open for some fresh air. Suddenly, I awoke to someone petting my hair through the open window. Not in a pat-pat kind of way either, like full-on stroking my hair. I was absolutely frozen on my bed. I didn't even breathe. This goes on for maybe 10 seconds, but when I tell you it felt like years had passed, me frozen in fear, trapped under its weight and wishing for air. Then the person just walked away. I could barely hear their footsteps in the grass. I never told anyone, not even my sisters, because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me. When I was young, I thought it was a nightmare, but as time goes on and the fear still rings true, I know that it happened. It could have been a lot worse for me, and I'm so happy that they never came back. From then on, I refused to sleep with the window open and eventually moved to the top of a bunk bed. Now even the slightest sound wakes me. Something falling, my cat yelling at me, my dog moving around. Since then, I've learned, always lock your windows. Fresh air is for when you are dead. Sweet dreams.